All right, we're going to talk about a name you definitely know, but a story that's way more complicated than you might think. We're diving deep into the Jeffrey Epstein files to figure out how one man's death could threaten to unravel a whole global network of power. When it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, the answer to that is a huge resounding yes. This is a man who became infinitely more famous in death than he ever was in life. And what he left behind? Well, it's like a Pandora's box of secrets that could still bring down some of the most powerful people on the planet. So, to really get a handle on the sheer scale of this scandal, you have to understand the man himself first. How does a guy from a regular working-class background end up building this shadowy empire of wealth and influence? It all started with one very smart, very calculated step. You can see the pattern right from the start. He's born in Brooklyn, his dad works for the city parks department, but then he gets a job teaching at one of the most elite private schools in the country. And boom, he uses the parents of his students to leapfrog right onto Wall Street. And even after he gets fired for misconduct, he uses those same connections to start his own super exclusive firm. The ladder to power for him was always built on other people's access. His whole strategy wasn't really about being a financial wizard, not at all. It was pure psychological manipulation. First, he'd build up this whole mystique about himself. Then, he'd get in the ear of these billionaires and convince them that their closest friends, even their family, were stealing from them. And once they were terrified, who was there to save them? Him. He was the only one they could trust. And this three-step trick, it worked on some of the wealthiest people in the world. But here's the thing. Epstein wasn't just hoarding money for the sake of being rich. No, he was converting that wealth into something far more valuable, something that would become his ultimate protection, an absolutely unparalleled global network.
And Ghislaine Maxwell, she was the absolute key. Her father was a huge media tycoon who died in total disgrace. Epstein basically gave her a new life, a new purpose. And in return, she handed him the master key to a world he was desperate to get into, a world of royalty, politicians, and A-list celebrities.
And his network, it wasn't just Wall Street. His tentacles reached everywhere. Politics, science, Hollywood, even Buckingham Palace. He made sure he was embedded in every single sphere of global influence that mattered.
Now, think about this for a second. Epstein somehow managed to become a close associate of two of America's most powerful and most bitter political rivals. At the same time, he was flying on private jets with Bill Clinton and partying it up with Donald Trump. That shows a really unique and frankly disturbing ability to operate at the absolute highest levels on both sides of the aisle.
And this wasn't some kind of dark secret whispered in the shadows. We're talking about a major magazine profile back in 2002, where Donald Trump is just openly talking about Epstein's preference for younger women. It was just part of his public image among his very powerful friends.
So, with this incredible network of powerful people acting as his invisible shield, the truly dark criminal nature of Epstein's whole operation started to surface. But when it did, it ran smack into a justice system that just seemed to completely buckle under his influence. 30 plus. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many women came forward after the first police investigation started down in Florida, way back in 2005. And behind that number are dozens of real people, each one telling a terrifyingly similar story of being recruited as a minor for massages that turned into sexual abuse. And this right here is where the system just catastrophically failed. Instead of facing a huge federal trial that could have exposed his entire network, Epstein got a secret sweetheart plea deal. This deal didn't just give him a slap on the wrist for a sentence, it shut down the entire FBI investigation. It kept his powerful friends completely out of the spotlight. It was a pretty stunning example of how influence can bend the arm of justice.
But, secrets this big don't stay buried forever. Years later, thanks to the #MeToo movement and some really courageous journalism, the world was forced to look at this case again. And that kicked off a dramatic second act that's still playing out as we speak.
And then, things started happening really fast. The Miami Herald's reporting just blew the whole case wide open, which led directly to Epstein's arrest. But just about a month later, he's found dead in his cell. He would never face a trial. But his secrets, they didn't die with him. The focus just shifted to the thousands and thousands of files he left behind.
So the public was promised transparency. We were told we'd get the truth. But what did we get instead? A sea of black ink. Huge, massive sections of these documents were just completely blacked out. It sparked this huge wave of outrage, and of course, tons of speculation about what
or maybe more importantly, who was still being protected.
Now, the names that we can see, they read like a who's who of global power. We're talking former presidents, British royalty, tech billionaires, even world-renowned academics. And let's be super clear here. Just because a name appears in these files, that is not proof that they committed a crime. But it absolutely raises some very serious, very unavoidable questions about the judgment and the associations of some of the most influential people in the world.
Okay, so let's pull back from the shocking headlines and the famous names for a second. Why does all of this really matter? What should you take away from this whole sordid mess? Well, the Epstein scandal really forces us to look at some deeply uncomfortable truths about power, about justice, and about the elite class that shapes our world.
So, here's the first huge question you have to ask. Was it just ignorance, or was it willful blindness? Did some of the smartest, most powerful people on Earth really just fail to see what was happening right in front of them? Or did they choose not to look because being friends with Jeffrey Epstein was just too beneficial to question?
And that leads to an even bigger, frankly scarier question. This moves beyond personal scandal and into the realm of global security. If Epstein had compromising information, blackmail, on world leaders, could he have used that to influence politics or the stock market or technology? The redacted files leave that terrifying question just hanging in the air.
From that very first sweetheart plea deal all the way back in 2008 to the blacked out documents we're seeing today, this entire case suggests there's a two-tiered system of justice. There's one for the victims, and then there's another, much gentler one for the powerful and the well-connected. And that erodes trust in our institutions at the deepest possible level.
And you've got to remember, the documents we've seen so far, they're just a tiny fraction of the whole story. The full truth about Jeffrey Epstein, his enablers, and his clients is almost certainly still locked away. And that leaves us with the most unsettling question of all. Is the biggest secret yet to come?